Hello and welcome back to Bitesize Boxing. It is good to be back. I must apologise, I really wanted to be more active while I was out in Asia. I wanted to get some previews out for this card in particular because from the channel's perspective this was the last really big high profile card. Yes, you've got the Night of the Samurai, which has interest but more niche interest. This was the last real big card of the year that could have given a lot of push for this channel, so it's unfortunate, but travel didn't permit and just generally been too busy. I mean, I flew back a couple of days ago and we've only just got back. So yeah, jet lag is kicking my ass, which is why I look like this, but we must push through. Today we are going to be talking about the David Benavidez Anthony Yarde fight. We will be covering a few other fights from this card, but this is the first one I'm going to be talking about. I'll probably upload it last though. So, where do we start with this one? In terms of what we got from David Benavidez, it was exactly what I expected. David Benavidez is someone who has fantastic combinations, can mix it up on the inside, but he is a decent outboxer if he needs to be. His boxing fundamentals are a bit underrated, if I'm honest. And I always thought against Anthony Yarde he would employ his boxing rather than trying to make it a phone booth fight, which is something David Benavidez can do as well. My thought was always that he would probably try and box Yarde early, and then once he's sort of softened Yarde up sufficiently, that's when he can really start putting his shots together and take him out, which is exactly what he did. So from David Benavidez's perspective, it's everything I expected to see. Going into this fight, I didn't give Anthony Yarde much of a chance, but I did do a preview a couple of months ago, and in that preview I said that Anthony Yarde's best chance was essentially to roll the dice early. There's no point trying to go late in this fight and take him to deep waters. That isn't Anthony Yarde's bag anyway. I was there ringside when he fought Artur Beterbiev, and he was gunslinging with Beterbiev from early because he had to. And yes, that meant that he gassed out and he got stopped. And yes, the same thing happened against Kovalev. He got taken late, he gassed out and got stopped, that time on a jab. But Anthony Yarde has not got the body mechanics. Anthony Yarde is not the type of fighter who is going to be able to, throw light shots and hold on to his power, hold on to his energy for the, those reserves for the later rounds and then try and come on late. That isn't Anthony Yarde. That isn't how he can fight. That's never been his bag, and that was never going to work against David Benavidez. And I say all of that to say this: what was the game plan here? This was one of the worst game plans I've seen in a world title fight in years. And of course it was masterminded by Tunde Ajayi, a guy who, in Anthony Yarde's case, should have been hurled out of camp about 8 years ago. Really and truly, it was very clear that Yarde was stagnating even before the Kovalev fight. We'd seen, yes, he was in against, the Travis Reeves of the world and whoever else who was fighting around that time, the Hobbs and all those kind of people, these, rank unknowns and journeymen, but even at that point it was clear that he was stagnating. He wasn't improving as a fighter, but you kind of gave Tunde a shot in that Kovalev fight. Of course the corner work was horrific, the game plan was useless, and he ended up getting stopped because of it. But yet and still he's persisted with Tunde, and I would go as far as saying, as bad as the game plans have been in some of these high profile fights, this was the worst one yet. This was absolutely disastrous. This was horrendous. This was the worst game plan I've seen in a world title fight in years, as I said. The game plan was, bizarrely, you have a guy who is powerful and fresh early, who can throw good combinations and can throw with Benavidez. Yes, Benavidez is the better combination puncher, but Anthony Yarde doesn't tickle. You see in that Beterbiev fight, he was throwing with Beterbiev. Yes, Beterbiev's combination punching isn't as good as Benavidez's, I get that, but he was throwing with him and having success. Even with David Benavidez, if he's throwing with Benavidez early while he's fresh, he is going to be able to catch Benavidez, he is going to be able to hit him, and at that point he's going to have enough to be able to put Benavidez in his box somewhat. Yes, it still may mean that he gets taken over later in the fight and gets taken out. Yes, that's possible. But you give yourself the best chance if you land on Benavidez early and give him something to think about. That is your only real shot in this fight. You're not going to outbox this guy. So what did Anthony Yarde do? He stood there with basically no foot movement, a high guard sort of Philly shell thing that he was switching between, completely stood up straight, no lateral movement, just shipping shots, and in return throwing literally pity-patty don't hit me punches. which is not something that Anthony Yarde normally does. This was very clearly a tactical idea where he thought rather than trying to throw hell for leather early and risk gassing out, he would try and conserve his energy by shipping punishment and throwing literally just placement shots. You know, when someone's just like that, just throwing really light, don't hit me punches just to keep him off. That's what Anthony Yarde was doing. And what does that mean? Well, that means that David Benavidez didn't have to worry about anything coming back, so he could just chew Anthony Yarde up and spit him out and stop him brutally, which is what we got. Why would you approach the fight like that? I'm asking the question here. Anthony Yarde, this was one of the worst tactical decisions I have seen in, as I say, in years. It's blown my mind that he thought that this would work. You could have asked any of us, nobody's online, and we could have told you that this game plan would never ever work in a million months of Sundays. Of course it wasn't. It was a ridiculous plan. You're going against an attritional fighter who is a combination puncher, who the only way you get his respect is by denting him, and your whole game plan is to not dent him, is to not throw a punch in anger for what, 5 rounds? By which point you have shipped so much punishment, you're knackered and shot anyway. I'm telling you now, if he had thrown caution to the wind early, he may well have got stopped still, but he would have had far more success. He would have had a far better chance of winning this fight. Yes, he may still have got stopped, but if you stand there and quite literally just take punishment and throw nothing back other than pity-patty placement shots for round upon round, you're just going to get broken down and chewed up, and that's exactly what happened. A bizarre game plan, a ridiculous game plan. And now it kind of sets up, I suppose, the Joshua Buatsi fight. It was one of those that, no, Yarde wasn't expected to win this fight, but, I say they're both coming off losses. Really, they are. Buatsi, yes, he won, but let's be honest, no one was impressed. It was an awful performance by Buatsi, and you could argue he looked even worse than Yarde did here. But, I mean, what on earth was that? As I say, those tactical decisions were horrific by Yarde. It made no sense. It was quite literally, if you didn't want to beat David Benavidez, these were the tactics you would employ. It was the opposite of what you should do. I still can't really believe what I've watched. The defence as well from Yarde has got worse. Again, we've been seeing regression under Tunde for years now. They kind of got to the mid-2010s where maybe 2016-ish, 2017, you kind of saw the best Yarde looked, and then he started to stagnate and slowly go down, and then 2019 we had the Kovalev fight, and then of course later on, was it 2022 or 2023? Beginning of 2023, wasn't it? We had the Beterbiev fight, and clearly, to my eye, he's been getting worse since the late 2010s. He's just been stagnating under a trainer that's no good. And yet and still we're now at a point where, to my eye, yes, it is only the eye test because he was in there against bad fighters, Anthony Yarde looks to have seemed to have got decisively worse than he was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Yes, the athleticism is obviously not going to quite be what it once was. The feet have definitely slowed down a touch. But even things like the guard, the defence, I'm not saying that Anthony Yarde was ever Pernell Whitaker, but look at his defence in this fight. It got markedly worse. At least, even against Beterbiev, he was able to slip and counter a little bit better. There was no slipping. He was stood literally rod in his back, Kell Brook style, and just no movement, no lateral movement whatsoever, and then with this porous guard just eating shots for round upon round and throwing not a punch in anger back. A ridiculous game plan. David Benavidez did what he had to do. Great performance by Benavidez. I got what I expected from him, but Anthony Yarde, I mean, I don't know what to say. Really disappointing. Stick a fork in him, really. Buatsi versus Yarde at this juncture, it makes sense, I suppose, but the interest is not going to be there unless they both have a fight in the interim, even if it's a tune-up fight each and they look half decent in it. No one cares now because we've just seen Yarde, a clearly regressed Yarde with no game plan yet again go in there. No one's going to have faith in Yarde putting it together against even someone like Buatsi because the guy in his corner is hopeless. And then Buatsi just looks shot and looks like Virgil Hunter's no good for him either. So it's one of those ones. It's going to be a case of which fighter on the night has slightly less of a bad game plan, I think. And that would maybe be Buatsi. I don't know. it's a fight for me that's really lost its luster now, and I don't really care either way if I fight or not, to be honest. But you let me know what you think, and yeah, take care, guys. Cheers.